Vignesh has joined us from India. Morning, Vignesh. It must be early morning in India, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Vignesh is enterprise cloud architect at Deloitte, India, and he's going to present information barriers in Microsoft Teams. Thank you so much for joining and presenting, Vignesh. Over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let me just quickly share my screen. You can just quickly confirm you can hear me well and see my screen, right?
Yes, I can hear you. I can see your slides.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much. Hey everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, based upon wherever you're joining us from today. First of all, really happy to be here. So this is my third year with AMS. I've been knowing this community for quite some time. It's always been a pleasure to be a part of their events and present. So really happy for me to be the third time with them. So today my session is going to be about information barriers in Microsoft Teams. So as Iqbal introduced, so my name is Vignesh Ganesan. So I work as an enterprise cloud architect and a technology strategist. So let's dive deep and try to understand what information barriers is all about. So before we even begin with, I would like to take a moment and thank all our sponsors on behalf of all the speakers, all the organizers and everybody who has played a vital role in this event, because I personally keep hosting a lot of events, a lot of conferences, and I personally know what it takes to organize an event of this sort, and without sponsors, it's quite hard. So I would really like to take this moment to thank all the sponsors. So today we also have the quizzes. So it is just not about taking away the knowledge. You also get a good chance to win some good goodies and prizes. So at the end of every single session, there would be a quiz that would be asked. So please pay close attention to the slide decks and all the points that I'm saying, because the quiz is basically going to come from the points that I'll be talking about in my session today. So with that, let's get started. Yeah. So let's begin by talking about information barrier in Microsoft Teams. Okay, so a little bit about myself. So my name is Vignesh Ganesan, and as I just introduced myself before, I'm an enterprise cloud architect and a technology strategist. So I've been a blogger on my own blog site for quite some time, even though I don't blog a lot of late. Then I also contribute my articles to European SharePoint community, Collab 365, C Sharp Corner, and there are a lot of other blog sites for which I write for. So I've been speaking on webinars, user groups, and conferences for quite some time. So I just love to travel across the globe, participating in conferences and sharing my knowledge on Microsoft 365 and other Microsoft cloud services. So I'm also the chapter lead for the C Sharp Corner Bangalore chapter, and specifically for the AOS community, I'm one of the ambassadors from India. So I've had the pleasure to do almost close to 20 plus Microsoft certifications over the years, and in addition to that, I'm also the chief organizer of the Microsoft 365 Power Platform and Cloud Security India user group. So today we have a really interesting agenda. So I'll begin by talking about what is information barriers in the first place, right? So if this is something that you're hearing for the first time, I want to make you folks comfortable about trying to understand what information barriers is all about and why should you even care. Okay, then we'll sort of dive deep and we'll try to understand about how you would even configure information barriers. What are the prerequisites? Because for anything that you want to do in M365, a good amount of prerequisites is required, right? So what are those prerequisites? What kind of permissions you would need? What kind of licenses we are talking about? So we'll spend a good amount of time trying to talk about that. Then we'll focus about how to segment our users. Maybe when I go through the session, you will try to understand what I mean by segmenting the users. So we'll try to understand how do I even segment my users so that I can take advantage of information barriers. Then we'll be talking about how to define information barrier policies, and we'll also try to do a small demo about how information barrier works in MS Teams, and also how this product is, how this capability is supposed to work in SharePoint as well as in OneDrive for Business. So this is our agenda. So with no further ados, let's get started. So to begin with, right? So what is information barriers in the first place? Now, we all know that Microsoft Teams is a great collab and communication tool. And trust me, to be honest, by far, this has been the best tool that I've ever used from a collaboration and communication standpoint, right? It's got chat, it's got meetings, it's got co-authoring, it's got collab, it's got soft phone capabilities, it's got apps, it's got great rich texting functionalities, anything you name it that is required for you to empower your modern workplace. I mean, Teams has got everything, and that is the go-to tool for anybody in the enterprise today, right? But this, sometimes, there could be a scenario wherein you do not want a specific department in an organization communicating with a different department in MS Teams. So what I mean by that is, people from a given group or from a given department, they should not be able to chat, have meeting, ping, or do any kind of those conversations in Microsoft Teams. Okay. And there are various reasons to it. Maybe if you take a look at some financial industry or some investment banking kind of industry or even education industry, people from a given set of group, they should not be able to chat or do anything with the other set of group within the same organization. So this might be really, not all such organizations, every organization that you see out there would have this kind of a necessity, but there are certain organizations which have this necessity. So if you're working for any such organization, or maybe if your customer is thinking about implementing such kind of capabilities, then this session should be a big eye opener for you. Okay, so now let's move on. I'm just trying to show you a small, an animation about what I'm talking about. Now, in this slide, if you take a look at this, there is a group called as investment banking, and then there is a group called as advisory. Just imagine this as an imaginary company. Okay, there are two departments. One is called as investment banking, and the other department is called as advisory. And then you have all these good users over here. Now, what information barrier is going to do is it's going to help you to segment the users. So people from investment banking group, they go to they can only access the capabilities, or they can only talk to people within investment banking. And people from advisory, they can only talk between the people who belong to the advisory group alone. Okay. And then there are going to be some set of people, they can be talking to investment banking people also, and they can be talking to advisory also. But it's not possible for somebody from here to be talking to somebody from here, or somebody from here to be talking to somebody from here. Okay. And how do we do this? We do this by raising an ethical wall, something like this. Now, this is what we mean by information barriers, wherein I'm trying to put a barrier in place so that people cannot have any kind of, conversations happening between them in whatever format it could be. Maybe chat, maybe sharing documents, maybe having meetings, any kind of conversation that you can think about from Teams as well as SharePoint and OneDrive perspective, sharing documents from OneDrive, sharing documents from SharePoint, trying to add somebody who belongs to this group as a member to a SharePoint site. So all these things can be knocked off. Now, this is what we mean by information barriers. Now, let's try to move further. Now, just in case if you're curious, what kind of companies really have these kind of weird requirements, right? Because not every organization out there is going to say that, hey, I want to restrict my people, because, the very specific reason Teams was introduced in any company was to empower that communication and collaboration, right? I mean, that is the product which has been fueling this. And specifically with recent days, with all this work from home happening, you can't even imagine a scenario without Microsoft Teams, right? But there are very specific organizations out there which has these kind of requirements. And here are some that I would like to name. So maybe in companies wherein the trader group should not be talking to the marketing team, if for these kind of companies. Then in financial organizations, maybe we are talking about banks. We are talking about companies who are dealing with stocks, companies who are into investment banking, right? Trade secret material, specifically in banking sectors. Maybe in a company, some product-based companies are in the sales and research team are not allowed to be talking to each other, right? And also in educational organizations, wherein people from a given class, they should not be students from a given class, they should not be talking to students from a different set of class. Right. And when it comes to the legal firm, maybe a lawyer who's working, maybe that legal firm is dealing with a client, and it is also dealing with the same client who is opposing him, and in that case they don't want this advocate to be looking into the other client, other advocates documents. So for those kind of things also you could use information barriers. And then also in government and professional services. So as I said, if at all you work for any such organizations, or maybe that is your own company, or maybe if you're offering any kind of client services, maybe that is one of your client which falls into one of these buckets, then you can think about how you can go ahead and implement information barriers if the need arises. Now, what happens with information barriers in Microsoft Teams, right? When you say, "Hey, Vignesh, I understand, right? But what kind of things can I restrict?" So this is what you could restrict in Microsoft Teams. So you could stop a person searching for a user from a different group. Okay, adding a member to a team cannot happen. Starting a chat session with someone cannot happen. Inviting someone to join a meeting. So potentially anything that you would do in Microsoft Teams for collab and communication can be restricted when you have information barriers. And once again, it is only within that specific group where you have been limited to have conversations, right? It's not with everybody. Maybe you are from research, and then there is another team which is part of sales, and you do not want research and sales to talk to each other. Then you would put a policy in place. Now, it doesn't mean that research cannot talk to somebody in HR. It doesn't mean that sales cannot be talking within somebody. They are totally allowed to do that. It is only that these two groups shouldn't be talking to each other, and you want to restrict that. That is why you create this virtual boundary by applying a information barrier policy. Now, this is what happens with IB in Microsoft Teams. And just in case if you're interested about, hey, what happens with IB in SharePoint Online and OneDrive? Because you would think that, hey, when I'm creating a Microsoft team, it would obviously create a Microsoft 365 group in the backend, and which means it is also going to create a SharePoint site, so on and so forth. So if I'm applying a information barrier policy, shouldn't that automatically be applied to the backend SharePoint site also? As of today, the IB policies, it doesn't honor the backend SharePoint site. So you need to go ahead and specifically configure certain items for the SharePoint Online and OneDrive also. And as you do it, these are the restrictions that you can do. So adding a member to a site, it's not possible as long as they fall within that segments. Accessing site or content by a user, sharing site or content with another user, searching a site, it's not possible. Now, as I speak about this, I'll also be showing a demo. I also captured good amount of screenshots also, so that you could literally visualize what I'm talking about. And this is one such use case that I want to pick and talk about how we do configurations for this, how we want to do, and I'll also show a demo of how this works. So in this use case, if you can look at it, right, that is a segment called as HR segment. And then we also have something called a sales segment and research segment. Okay. So what we are going to do is we are going to try to configure information barriers within these three kind of departments. So what we are planning to achieve is people from sales segment should not be able to talk to people in research segment, and people from research segment should not be able to talk to people in sales segment. So it is just not one way, it is other way around also. But however, HR should be able to talk to people in sales segment, and HR should be able to talk to people in research segment, because HR is something which is common to every single department in the organization, right? They are the go-to people for anything, and you do not want to restrict any kind of communication. Now, the first thing that we want to look at is, now given that we have this use case, what are, the very first thing that I want to speak about is, okay, what are the information barrier configurations that I need to do? What is that prerequisite, or what is that prep work that I need to do so that I can go ahead and make my tenant enabled for information barriers? Okay. Now, these are the different configuration items that we are going to talk about. So we'll begin by talking about what are the different prerequisites and permissions that is needed in your tenant to enable information barriers. Because if there is anything that you have understood so far by working with Microsoft 365 is everything comes with the license, right? So unless and until you're licensed for that, then you don't get to enjoy that capability. There are certain things which you get along with this queue. There are certain things for which you need to go to a higher licensing. And for certain things, you need to go ahead and purchase the add-on, right? So as long as you're planning to work with M365, it is very, very important that you understand their licensing and their subscription plans very well. So we'll do the configure prerequisites and permissions. Then we'll be talking about how to segment users in your organization. So by segmenting, what I mean is, how do I segment people that these set of people belong to sales, these set of people belong to HR, and these set of people belong to research? How can I put people into the respective buckets? Okay. And then we'll be talking about, okay, I've done the prerequisite, I've taken care of my permissions, I've also put the people into the appropriate bucket so that I'm segmenting them. Then how can I go and create and configure these information barrier policies? And lastly, how can I go ahead and apply these policies on all these users which I've classified? Now, this is what we are going to look from a configuration perspective. So the first thing that we're going to look at is required license. I can't stress more than this, because as I was just talking about, anything that you do in Microsoft 365, licensing is prime, right? So for you to get the capability of information barriers, you should be in either one of these subscriptions, either Microsoft 365 E5 or A5. Now A5 is specifically for education plans. Same goes for Office 365 E5 or A5, or Office 365 Advanced Compliance, Microsoft 365 Advanced Compliance, or Microsoft 365 Insider Risk Management. So you should be running either one of these subscriptions, or the person or the user who's going to be impacted by this information barrier policy should be having this license applied. Sometimes if you're just going to plan, if you just want to purchase this as an add-on, like say for instance the Microsoft 365 Insider Risk Management, you want to just purchase that add-on alone, then the person who's going to be impacted by this information barrier policy, he should be having that license applied on him. So that is how the M365 licensing works. Okay, from a permission perspective, okay, now I have the license. So what kind of permission should me as an admin have to go ahead and configure information barrier policy? So these are the ones. Of course, as we all know, the highest privilege, either Microsoft 365 Global Administrator, or if it is an Office 365 tenant, then Office 365 Global Administrator. Or if you are talking about giving RBAC, or if you want to restrict permissions because you simply don't want everybody having global admin permissions, then either you should be having the compliance administrator role or IB compliance management role. Okay. Now, I'll just take a moment to talk about these roles. Let me bring up my demo environment here. I'm going to share my screen. So specifically from a permission standpoint, right? Most of the time, what we end up doing is we would go to our admin center and we'll start looking at the roles here, because this is the place where most of the Office 365 admin roles are defined, right? If I go here, you would go here and you would say, hey, these are all the different kind of role assignments that I have. But when it comes to a security and compliance standpoint, what a lot of us fail to understand is, if you go to the compliance center, then there are some permissions which are given here also. You may not see these permissions or roles on the main page. So you can always come back here and look at the roles here. So it is very, very important for anybody who's dealing with any kind of this compliance requirement, specifically for information barrier policies. Always come here and make sure that you take a look at this. There are so many such roles given here, which you may not be seeing in the main admin panel. So this is where you would go to apply the roles which I just spoke about, right? You can come in here and you can apply that. Okay, let me just bring back my slide here. Yeah. And the next thing is directory data, right? Now, as if you remember, I was talking about how I would go ahead and segment the users. Now, segmenting the users happens by the user attributes. I can say that, hey, in Azure AD, if a person's attribute, maybe on the department attribute, we are putting in as sales, right? And for the different one, for the other person, it is given as HR, right? Now, based upon the attribute, you can classify the users. Now, what I mean by that is, let me once again go back to my demo environment here. And if you take a look at this, this is how you would go ahead and classify the users. Now, these are all the users in my tenant. And the attribute which I want to pick to classify the users is the department attribute, right? Now, if you take a look at this, now one of the users which I'm planning to do a demo with today is going to be Cameron White. Now, let me open this, right? And if you go here, you can see all the attributes. This is what I mean by the attributes. I mean, we've all been working with Active Directory for so many years, so we know what an attribute means. But it's very, very important that you have all the necessary attributes populated, because we are going to use the attribute property to segment the users. Okay. Now, if you take a look at this, for this person, he belongs to the sales department. And in my demo, I'm planning to use sales as the attribute. I'm sorry, the department attribute to classify or to segment the users. So it is very, very important that, for all the users in your tenant, that you have the right attributes populated. Okay. And just in case, if you haven't updated their profile information in Azure Active Directory, please do that. And it is not quite often that you want to use only department attributes. It might differ. Maybe in your company, you want to segment the users based upon the reporting manager. It could be a scenario, or maybe based upon their location, anything, right? It's not always mandatory that it should be department, because each organization has their own set of requirement. So Microsoft has done a very good job in listing out all such attributes that you could use. It's also available in docs.microsoft.com, and this is a screenshot that I have captured. So either one of those attributes that you could use to go ahead and configure or to segment the users. And this is how a user's profile would look in AAT. Now I just showed you a small demo of this, wherein you could go click the user and see. And in this screenshot, if you look, we have these three users, Diago, we have Irvin, and if you look at the department, you could see sales, HR, and research. Bianca is also there. And as I said, in our demo, we are planning to segment the users based upon their department. Now, the other prerequisite is scope directory search. Now, this is one capability that we have on the Microsoft Teams Admin Center. Okay, let me just quickly show this also. I'll go here. I'll bring up my demo environment. I'll go to the Microsoft Teams Admin Center. So let me just come in here. Okay, come on. Okay, Teams. Settings. Yeah. Scope directory search using an Exchange address book policy. Now this should be turned on. I don't know why this was turned off. So this particular capability should be turned on in your tenant if at all you're planning to use the information barrier policy, because by default this would be turned off in your tenant. So it's very, very important that you go ahead and turn it on, and just go ahead and click on save it. Now what this means is, if you take a look at this specifically for people who have been with Exchange for a very long time, right? What we are basically trying to do is, hey, I want to take advantage of the Exchange address book policy, the ABB policy, which I mean, if you have been with Exchange for quite some time, you know what I'm talking about, right? We have something called as address book policy in Exchange. Now what the address book policy means is, it helps you to create virtual boundaries within your organization's GAL. Okay, because when I say in GAL, you can go to your Outlook and you can look at your GAL, wherein you can look up for people, you can search for them. So with the Exchange address book policy, you can scope, you can say that, hey, even within the GAL, this set of people should be able to only see this set of users, and this set of people should not be able to see this set of users. So basically, information barrier policy is trying to take advantage of the ABP, which is your address book policy. So this is also something which you have to go ahead and turn on in your tenant. And the other main prerequisites are EXO license, because a lot of this capability is mainly dependent upon Exchange. So you need to make sure that the targeted user also has an Exchange Online license applied to him or her. Okay, and even audit logging, so that everything that you're configuring gets captured. So if you do not have audit logging turned on, please make sure that you go ahead and turn it on as well. Now, what I mean by this is, I mean, I'm pretty sure everybody would know where to go ahead and turn it on. But if you're somebody who's new, who's getting into this M365 world, and also with the way Microsoft keeps changing these, this control here and there, right? So if you go here, you would go to search, you would go to your audit log search, and this is where you should be able to see your audit logging. And now they have moved this to the, it has come down, it's come to the, because earlier this was in the security center, now they have moved it to the compliance center. This is already turned on. If it is a fresh tenant, you will see a button here asking you to turn it on. Please go ahead and turn it on and give it 24 hours. Then it will start auditing all the activities that you do in your tenant. Okay. Let's move on. And the other prerequisite is no address book policies, right? So what I mean by this is, since I just showed you, you have to go ahead and turn on the toggle button so that you can that Exchange address book policy capabilities turn on. But you should also make sure that as a prerequisite that there is no existing ABB policy already in your tenant. Specifically from an Exchange standpoint, as I said, right, if you want to restrict, if you want to create virtual boundaries between GALs, some organizations used to do that, but you need to make sure that no such Exchange address book policy already exists, or else that will start conflicting with this. So that is very, very important. And just in case if you're a PowerShell fan, then these are some PowerShell modules that you could use to configure whatever I just spoke about. And please bear in mind that you should be using the SCC PowerShell module, the Security Compliance Center PowerShell module, because most of the things that we would be configuring in your information barrier policy, for that we need the SCC PowerShell module. Okay, the ninth main step is the admin consent. Now, this is what basically we are trying to do here. Is this is a PowerShell commandlet that is directly available in doc.microsoft.com. So if we go ahead and run this, and this is the application ID, you would get a prompt like this. So basically what it is trying to do is it is going to ask a consent saying that, hey, can Teams go ahead and can it have consent on all your Microsoft Teams? So this is also a commandlet that you need to run so that Microsoft Teams can go ahead and make all these changes to the users in your tenant. Okay. Right. So those are from a prerequisite and permission standpoint, these are the 9 steps that you need to be mindful of. So just to give a quick recap of this, the admin consent, no address book policies, PowerShell modules, make sure that you have EXO license, then turn on audit logging, scope directory search should be turned on, make sure that the user profile properties are updated properly, and the required permissions, required licenses. So these are all that you need to have. You need to make sure that these are met from a prerequisite and permission standpoint. Now, the next thing that we want to jump into is your segmenting the users. Okay. So for this, let me dive into this. So what I mean by segmenting the users, right? You would basically do this for the first main purpose is to put the users into the appropriate bucket. Okay. And this is basically going to help you to determine your policies. First, you need to list down your policies. When I say listing down your policies, what I mean by that is you should have a clear understanding about what are my block policies going to be and what are my allow policies going to be. What I mean by that is which 2 segments shouldn't be allowed to have conversation with each other and which 2 segments are allowed to have conversation. Okay, so it could be only research and HR within my company. These 2 departments, they should not be allowed to have conversations. That's all. Every other company or every other department in my tenant, it is totally okay for them to go and have conversations. I don't have any problem with that. So you should clearly define these are the block policies and these are my allow policies. Okay. And then is when you do the identify segments. For that, you need to list down the segments and you should also plan your segments. What that means is, and the very specific thing that you need to understand is a user can be only in one segment. Okay. So somebody who's belonging to the sales segment, you cannot go ahead and put him inside the HR segment. It simply doesn't make any sense because it is a conflict. Okay. And each segment can have only one information policy applied. Okay. So if you have defined a segment, that segment can have only one policy applied to it, and you cannot have 2 more policy because once again that will have a conflict. So you cannot do that also. Determine AAD attribute to define segments. As I said, make sure that you pick the correct attribute. You cannot have segments defined maybe for one particular segment. You cannot use the department attribute, and for a different segment that you're planning to build, you cannot go ahead and use a different attribute. So it should be uniform. Now, what I mean by segment is this picture should help you give a proper clarification. So if you take a look at this, it is putting people into the appropriate bucket. So I can create 3 such segments: HR segment, sales segment, and research segment. And based upon the user attribute, I would run the PowerShell commands, which I'll just show you in a minute, and I can put them into the respective buckets like this. Okay. And once again, let's refer back to our use case here. Now, in segmenting the users, same use case. So let's see what I'm planning to do. Okay, as once again, we have the HR segment, we have the sales segment, and we have the research segment. And the way we have split them into 3 different segments, it is by using the department attribute in their profile. What is that we are planning to achieve? So first thing is we have to define the HR segment, and the way you would do this is by using this PowerShell command. I'm sorry that we have put the screenshots here because prepping this itself would take a good amount of time, so it is not really advisable to go ahead and do it in a live. So everything has been pre-configured, and I've just captured the screenshots. So for defining the HR segment, you need to make sure that you're using this SCC PowerShell commandlet. If you haven't already loaded it, please make sure that you have loaded it, and only then you'll be able to run this command. So it says new organization segment, the name is going to be HR segment, the user group filter, I'm going to do it department equals HR. So everybody, what this commandlet is doing is everybody who has the attribute as HR, put them into the HR segment. That's what this is basically going to do. The next thing is same way I'm going to define my sales segment also. Same concept here for the sales segment. Everybody where the department attribute is equal to sales, put them into the sales segment. The third thing is define your research segment also. Same concept here. So everybody, I would create a segment called as research segment, and everybody who where the department is equal to research, put them inside the research segment. Okay. So now that we have defined these three segments, now let's talk about how to define information barrier policies. How can I go ahead and apply a policy? Because till now we spoke about the prerequisites, we spoke about the permissions, then we also spoke about how we would segment the users based upon their attributes. Okay, we've got all this sorted. Now, how can I go ahead and define an information barrier policy? I need to go ahead and apply the policy. Now, how can I do it? Okay, now for defining the policies, you need to first thing that you need to do is block communication between two segments, allow a segment to communicate only with one other segment. Now, what you need to understand is the policy configuration works in such a way that if I'm saying a policy that HR should not be able to talk to, I'm sorry, sales should not be able to talk to research, that is just one way. You should also configure it the other way around, saying that, research should not be able to talk to sales also. Because it is for the first time when you configure it doesn't mean that it takes care of both ways. No, that's not the way it works. You need to configure it for both the ways. Okay, once again, picking on our same use case here, we have these three different segments. And what we are going to do now is we are going to say that sales should not be able to talk to research. We are planning to restrict that. And then if you look at, we are planning to do the other way around also, wherein research should not be allowed to have communication with sales as well. However, HR as a segment can have communication between research and sales. So this is what we are planning to do. Now let's look into the PowerShell commandlet for that. Now the first policy, sales should not be able to talk to research. That is our first policy. And this is the PowerShell commandlet that you need to run. Once again, you should have SEC SEC PowerShell module installed for this. And you would go ahead and run this PowerShell. It says, hey, new information barrier policy. The names is sales to research, and the assigned segment is sales segment, and the segment that I want to block is research segment, and the state should be kept inactive. So first you're only defining the policies, you're not activating it. So that's why we are giving that inactive inactive command. So you would go ahead and define it like this. The second policy, if you take a look at it is vice versa, the other way around. I need to prevent the communication from research to sales also, because that is not automatically taken care of. So you have to go ahead and do that as well. And for that, this is the commandlet that you would run, wherein I'm going to say research to sales, assigned segment is research segment, the segment blocked is the sales segment, and state is inactive. And finally, our third policy is HR as a segment should be able to talk to both sales and research. Okay. For that, we are also going to define our third information barrier policy, and we are going to say HR sales research. Assigned segment is the HR segment, and the segments allowed. Earlier, you would have seen a different thing here. The segments allowed are HR segment, sales segment, and research segment, and the state is inactive. So these are the three PowerShell commandlets that I have run and captured here. And this is how you would do when you're planning to configure this also. Okay. And once that is done, you can go ahead and run this commandlet to get all the policies, information barrier policies that is available in your tenant. It'll list you the GUID here, which you can see. Okay. And now we can go ahead and activate it, because if you looked in the previous window, every policy that I defined was in inactive mode. Okay, I just passed inactive, inactive, inactive. Okay, and then what we did is we tried to list down all the policies. Now we need to go ahead and activate each and every single policy. And this you could say set information barrier policy identity, and you can call that GUID, and you can put the state as active. The moment you do that, you need to wait for 30 minutes, and only then the policy will get activated, because it needs to go through all your tenant. Right. The same way you would go ahead and do it. Apply information barrier, start information barrier policies. Okay, and then you can see the application status. So earlier, when you would see the status would have been shown as not started. And after once you have activated it, wait for 30 minutes to 60 minutes, because it needs to replicate across your tenant, and then you could see the status as completed. So make sure that everything that you would do in information policy standpoint has to be done through PowerShell. There is no proper GUI for that yet. Maybe Microsoft may plan to do that later, but at least for now, everything is through PowerShell. So you can go ahead and check the status. Okay, so let's assume that everything has been configured. Now let's go ahead and look into our demo first. Okay, for demo, let me log into my virtual machine here. I'll show you what I have from a demo perspective. Okay, before that, this is what I'm planning to demo you. These are going to be our demo users. We have a person by the name Cameroon White. So Cameroon White, this person, he belongs to the sales team. Diago, he belongs to the HR team. And then we have Irvin, who's from the research team. Okay, now as per our use case, Cameron from sales team should not be able to talk to Irvin, or he should not be able to add him to a team chat. He should literally not even be able to see him anywhere. The same goes for Irvin also. Irvin should not be able to see Cameron, not have any kind of conversations whatsoever. However, Diago, who is part of HR, this guy should be able to see both these people. He can go ahead and add them to a team, and whatever form of conversations he can have, he can go ahead and have with them. Okay, now this is what we are planning to demo. So let me log into my demo environment for that. So here I am. So in Teams, just give me 1 minute. Okay, let me bring this up. Okay, so the first user here, we have Cameron White. He has logged into the Microsoft Teams desktop client. And then I have one more, God. Okay, something is wrong here, Cameron White. And then let me pull up this another user whom I have here. Happened. Let me just quickly log into this. I don't know. I was logged in and all of a sudden something has happened. Please bear with me. I'll go ahead and log in to these. Cameroon White. Let me log in as Diago also. Okay, I'm logging in as Diago. This guy belongs to the HR team. Let him log in, and let me also, Cameron White is here. And let me also log in as 3, because we have 3 different users that I wanted to show, right? Who is this guy? The last guy that we have is Irvin. So Irvin is from the research department. Let me get into his teams also. Now, the first thing that we want to understand in our demo is like this. Okay, so this guy, Cameroon White. Okay, so Cameroon White, as per our demo, this guy belongs to the sales team, which means he should not be able to see Irvin, and which means he should not be able to add him to a team, search for him, do anything, right? Any kind of communication whatsoever it might be in Microsoft Teams. So I go here and let me try to add our friend Irvin here, who belongs to research. See this? We didn't find any matches. Talk to your IT admin, expanding the scope of your search. So that doesn't mean that Irvin doesn't even exist in our directory, but this is the impact of the information barrier policy. It will simply throw this error saying that I'm sorry, I'm not able to find that match. Okay, and let's try to see the other way around, wherein we have somebody called as Cameroon, from Cameroon, who's from sales to research. Let's see the other way around. Let's see what happens from Irvin's standpoint, right? So where do we have Irvin? Irvin, come on. Going to Irvin. I think this is Irvin. I'll go to Teams here. So Irvin, who's from research, you should not be able to see or add Cameroon White, okay? Because that's the policy that we have defined here. Okay, now let me try to add Irvin to a team here. Add member. I'm going to try to add Cameroon. See this? We didn't find any matches. Talk to your IT admin. Okay, because this guy is from the sales department. However, if I want to add somebody who's from HR, now Diego, as we all know, he's from HR. I can very well go ahead and add Diego because, as you know, as per our segment, we are allowed to have communication with people who are from the HR segment. It is just that somebody from research cannot talk to sales and somebody from sales cannot talk to research. Okay, so we saw the both ways. And just to complete our demo, let's also see what happens from a HR standpoint, because HR should be allowed to have communication with everybody, isn't it? Okay, new incognito window. This is not really what I expected. Okay, so Diego here. So this guy is from our HR department. So let's see what happens from a HR standpoint. Come on. I actually had it all these opened. I don't know what happened to my VM. Everything got closed, and now I had to do this. I'm really sorry about this. Let me try to sign out and sign in just to complete our demo, because I think something is stuck up here. I'll try to log in as Diego into the client so that I can show that HR is allowed to have a conversation between both these set of people. Come on, teams. Okay. All right, so this guy Diego is from HR, and as per our policy, he should be able to add both the users and he should be able to see them as well. So let me click on add member. So let's try to add the first guy who's from sales, who is Cameroon. I can see Cameroon, good. And then also Irvin, who's from research. I can go ahead and add Irvin also. Yes, perfect. So just because this person is from HR, and as per our policy, HR can talk to both the segments, you can see this working. So, that completes our a demo from a team's standpoint. Okay, so I've done it. Now, let's try to look at information barrier policies in SharePoint and OneDrive. And just to sort of let you know, what I showed you there is just a very limited functionality, but in the real world, you can stop them from getting into meetings. You cannot invite them to meetings, screen sharing, and that is a lot. And one thing which I couldn't show you is any chat that you had before, right? Even the chat conversations would be, if previously you were a part of the chat. God. Come on, demo. Yeah, I'll be running out of time. But one thing which I wanted to show, which I wanted to also describe is, if before the segment happened, if you were part of a group chat, right? Now, say for instance, what I mean by that is, if Cameroon, Diego, and Irvin, or were all part of a group chat, or maybe Diego, Irvin, or somebody else was part of a group chat, right? After this policy was applied, that person will be removed from the group chat, because it is, once again, the policy says that, hey, these three people cannot be talking to each other. So any conversation, any kind of group chat which happened before that, after this policy has been applied, that particular user will be removed from the group chat. That is something which I wanted to show. I also had that configured, but I don't know, my lab's being weird. So also be mindful of that. All these things is available in docs.microsoft.com as well. Now let's look at information barrier policies in SharePoint and OneDrive, right? In order for, as I said in the beginning, right, just because you enable it on Teams, that doesn't mean that the backend SharePoint and OneDrive is also going to be impacted by this. You need to go ahead and run this PowerShell commandlet, which says set SPO tenant information barrier suspension false and wait for 1 hour. Now what this thing is going to do here is the moment you would do that, let me go to my SharePoint admin center. And you need to run that PowerShell commandlet and you need to wait for an hour. And after you do that, if you go to your SharePoint admin center, you can see this capability called as IB segments, this particular column. This you won't be able to see this column before you run that PowerShell commandlet. Unless and until you run it, you will never see this. Okay. So this is me trying to put a SharePoint site into a given segment. Okay, like this. Now, what I mean by that is let me pick this SharePoint site here. Okay, and I can go to policies. And take a look at this. You have an option here called as segment. Now, this particular site is not assigned to any segment. Just look at how I can assign it to a segment. Now, select information segment. I can say that research segment. Okay, then I can add, like, maybe the site is part of research segment, and research segment is only allowed to talk to HR segment. Now, that is our policy. I cannot say research segment and sales segment because these two groups are not allowed to talk to each other. So they cannot also be, the SharePoint site also cannot be like that, right? I can say like this, and if I try to add one more segment, it would simply say, nope, you cannot do that. Okay, I can just simply go ahead and say cancel. Same way, if I'm doing sales segment, and I can simply say HR. It won't be allowing me to do research. It's just that way, right? And if I go to a segment which has already been there, right? Now what you need to understand is even a SharePoint admin cannot go ahead and change the segment because it is already hardcode. Say to manage segments associated with this site, manage the team members, because it is the membership which is applied, the policy which is applied on the user, which is sort of trying to take the control here. And this is the segment that I was talking about. And just in case, once again, if you're a huge PowerShell fan, then this is what that you could use. If you want to, from a PowerShell standpoint, you can use PowerShell to go ahead and configure it, because certain things, at least you should use the SEC PowerShell module to configure information barrier policies. Okay. Audit events available in SharePoint. So what you need to understand is, from a SharePoint perspective, whatever you have done also gets audited, right? Like this, you can go and you can say segment. So these capabilities gets audited. Removed segment, change segment from site, applied segment to a site. All these things gets audited here very well. Okay. Site creation and management. This is really important. Please pay close attention. So when a segmented user creates a SharePoint site, the site is associated with the user segment. Now, what this means is if I belong to sales segment and if I go ahead and create a site, that site will be automatically be assigned to sales segment. Okay. Now, site owners can add more segments to the site, which I just showed you. Maybe sales, I can just go ahead and add saying that I can also be a part, I can talk to HR segment. That can be possible only by site owners, but site owners cannot remove added segments from sites. Very important. So you cannot go ahead and remove a segment from the site. Now, segments associated with Microsoft Teams sites. Okay. Now, segments associated with the Microsoft Teams site, members are automatically associated with the site within 24 hours. Okay. It takes 24 hours for that to reflect. Now, SharePoint admins can't change the segment associated with the site when the site is connected to a team. Something which I just showed you. Even as an admin, you can't go ahead and change it. Now, what will be the impact of this? Now, let's say in SharePoint, I did all this segmenting so that I can have information, but what will be the impact of it? So this is what will happen. So from a site sharing perspective, when a segment is associated with a site, the share with anyone with the link option is disabled. That's the first thing that will happen when your site has the segment label applied to it. The site and its content can be only shared with users whose segment matches that of a site. Very important. So if it is part of the sales segment, then you can only share with the person who belongs to the sales department. You cannot share it with somebody who's from the research department. Okay. Now, new users can be added to the site as site members only if their segment matches of that site. Now, what that means is if that site says sales, if that site is part of the sales segment, then every new user that you add should be part of the sales department only. Okay. Now Microsoft has designed it very beautifully so that you cannot go wrong anywhere. Okay. And what happens when a site that has no segments associated to it? The site and its contents can be shared based on the information barrier policy applied to the user. So the user policy will come into picture. Now, let's say if there is a site which has no segment applied to it, right? And if me as a user who's part of the sales segment tries to share that site, it will look into what policy on the user has been applied. So as a sales guy, I'll be able to share that site only with somebody from sales. I won't be able to share it with somebody from research. So this is really, really important. And if you look at this, Microsoft has designed it in such a beautiful way so that you cannot go wrong. Okay. Now I'm almost at the end of our session, and these are some good references that I want you to take a look at if at all you're planning to configure information barrier policies. So this needs some good amount of planning. You need to really plan it well, do some proper testing. And please don't try this on the Microsoft 365 E5 developer subscription, because you simply, whatever licenses that we showcased about, at least the information barrier policy, that capability is not there. So you really need a proper E5 tenant. The E5 developer subscription doesn't give you that capability. Okay. So these are some good references. So later when the slide is made available to you, please go ahead and make use of these references. And you can, as I spoke about in the beginning, so please join the quiz and try to win as many prizes as possible. So once again, thanks a lot, people, for being wonderful audiences, and thanks once again to all the sponsors. It was really a pleasure to be part of this conference for the third time in a row, and I'm really looking forward to be a part of this conference next year also. Good luck, and please stay safe. Thank you. I'm open for questions. If at all you have any questions, now would be the right time.
Thank you so much, Vignesh. That was really great session, very insightful. We will wait. I can't see any questions as of now in chat, but I will ask a couple of questions for the benefit of audience. And please feel free to park for later answer if something is not relevant. First thing you mentioned, as we can apply these policies, Vignesh, and you have mentioned some particular timings, like probably 30 minutes. It affects to synchronization of the policies. Is there a way we can force or override this time? I mean, if something needs to be done more quickly or apply to those policies rapidly, is there a workaround for that?
No, because what I've observed in the demo is this is something that you need to wait. We can't really force this. That is nothing that we can do about it. You really need to wait because it needs to, replicate across the tenant. So that time has to be given.
Yeah, that's great. And Vignesh, after applying these policies, what sort of auditing is available on tenant level for Microsoft Teams? Like who has enabled these policies and which users have been added to a particular segment? Are these details available as a part of audit details?
Yeah, not everything. As of today, what I showed you from a SharePoint, those auditings are available. And from a team standpoint, like this user has been added to this segment, right? So those kind of auditing is available. Yeah, but not everything. I don't think Microsoft has really extended all the capabilities yet there in the security and compliance center. But certain things, yes, they are there.
Yeah, thanks. Great. And please, I will ask audience if there are any questions. You can post your questions in chat, or you can raise your hand in chat, and I will unmute you if you want to speak and ask your questions. And Vignesh, how about like we are doing a segregation, we are building barriers, but is there still a room or facility available to facilitate like sort of private channel? Like in general, we say no connections, but if one team needs to just imagine a sort of scenario like monitored connection. For example, maybe head of two different departments, they observe and they arrange some time connections. Can there be any possibility like that as well?
Such exceptions, I haven't seen anything, because this is clearly something which you have to apply when you clearly say that nobody from this department should be talking to anybody in the opposite department, right? Because it clearly looks at that department attribute. So there is nothing that you could do. It clearly says no form of communication whatsoever. It might be, maybe you could use a different collaboration tool, right? Maybe
That's right.
use Skype. I mean, not Skype is the wrong answer because we don't even have that anymore. Maybe you can use something else, right?
Yep,
But
email
at least
based.
within Teams, you cannot do it. Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you so much, Vignesh. I don't see any questions as of now. So really thanks.
Sure.
Thanks for your time. Thanks for sharing with community. Really appreciate. And
Sure.
thanks to all attendees and on the behalf of organizers, all volunteers, I want to say thanks. And please, from now to onwards, we will have a break and sessions will continue after 1 hour's lunch break. Thank you so much. Thanks, Vignesh, once more.
Awesome.
And thank you all. Take care.
All right. It's been a pleasure. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye bye.
Bye.